Okay, welcome again, everybody. We are going to continue with our series called Songs of Hope and Love. And we've got a special treat this morning because a member of our community, Dave Cunniff, is going to come and speak to us. Dave's a former pastor and been part of Cedar Ridge for a few years now. So let's give him a really big welcome as he comes up to share with us. Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Security? No, thank you, Matthew. I did not really expect to be invited to speak to the church anytime soon, to be honest. But when Matthew approached me about it, I thought, well, this must really be a slow time of the year for the church. So, all right, here we are. So you got me. So as Matthew said, my wife Jenny, who's sitting here, we've been coming to Cedar Ridge for a little over 2 years. I think Easter 2 years ago was our first Sunday or something like that. 3 years ago, she corrects me. Boy, time flies. Anyway, but we've just really loved this congregation. And in the time that we've been coming, an average a few times a month, it has become what we would call our church home here in Maryland. We moved here in 2019. So we've been here 7 years-ish. And it's been really nice to find a place like Cedar Ridge to settle down. So I know all the traditions that Cedar Ridge has been cultivating over the years. We've become familiar with many of them. We've not been able to partake in all of them yet, but we're looking forward eventually to doing so. But I really like the Cedar Ridge in 7 minutes moment, the chance for first time attenders to come and go to the back there and hear about the history of the church in 7 minutes or less. And so I'm going to try to do a little history of Dave Cunniff here in 7 minutes or less. We'll see, right? Because when you get the microphone and you are a former pastor and you get on a stage like this, you time is just kind of abstract sometimes, But a little background too. You've seen me on the stage. I've played piano a few times with the worship team. Nikki's recruited me to kind of do some of that, which has been super, super fun. A lot of really talented folks here at Cedar Ridge. And music as an outlet has been kind of a constant throughout my life. We're going to talk a lot about that over the next 45, 50 minutes or so. But to give you a little bit of background and kind of context too, I'm not actually a professional musician. I've never really been a professional musician. I'm an engineer by trade, by vocation. And so I do approach life with a kind of a technical bent. I try to kind of see technical things, technical explanations, correlations, different things like this, and a lot of things I come across. And what it kind of means in the context of this message I'm going to be giving you is I was thinking about the energy we get from the sun. That's not the sun, but it's pretty close right now. It comes in the form of photons, right, and other energetic particles. But I don't know if you knew that the photons that come from the sun aren't created in the sun and then immediately get, sent outward. What happens is because the sun is so dense, it's a different form of matter than we're accustomed to. And so these photons, when they're created, they kind of bounce around inside the sun for a long, long time. And some estimates are anywhere from 10,000 years up to over 100,000 years it takes for a photon that's created in the center of the sun to finally make its way out to the surface, to where it can then come out to the rest of space and illuminate the earth and land on us and give us a sunburn or whatever else. So think about this when you're walking outside, next time you see your shadow, and think about the fact that what your shadow means is that photons that took between 10,000 and 100,000 years to form and then come to the earth, you've deprived those photons of the last 5 feet that it would have taken them to hit the surface. Have you ever thought about that? No, you only think about yourselves, right? So this message is going to kind of ramble a little bit like a photon coming from the sun. And that's okay. But a little bit more about me. We moved here for my job. As Matthew introduced, I am also a former pastor. I was a vocational minister for part of my adult life. Back in, I guess it started in around 1998 through around 2002, 2003-ish. And that was a very interesting and a very rich time. But part of that vocation was leading music. And I've done church music since I was very, very, very little. When it comes down to how I feel about music in church, it's deeply steeped in all of the experiences I've had with music in church. Some of them have been fantastic. The majority of them have been fantastic. Some of them have been stressful. And some of them have just kind of been, why did we even bother doing that? And we all feel this way, right? Music is music. It's a very individual thing. And I believe, if I can, be so bold as to guess, one of the reasons Matthew invited me to come is because of the musical background I have within the context of the series we're in, which is Songs of Hope and Love. And it was an opportunity for me to kind of show what music kind of means to me within this context. So kind of want to ask you all a question, and this will help me relate, even as you kind of get to know me more. I want to kind of get to know you all a little bit better as well. Is there a song, or maybe songs, when you hear that music, you could be at a restaurant, you could be listening on the radio, just catching it passing by somebody else's radio, you hear that song and it instantly transports you to another place, another time. That happens to me all the time. And we have the piano here. The piano is kind of it's a little bit of a pacifier for me, because I wanted to be able to kind of play a few things and sing a few things and kind of work through a little bit of a continuation, really, of what Nikki started last week, which was, what was your favorite love song? And so what I'm going to describe to you is some of the songs that take me back to some of my earliest memories. And my particular form of, I don't know, neurodivergence, it wasn't really a thing when I grew up to be labeled neurodivergent. But I can hear a song, and it's not just, oh, that's a pleasant memory. I hear it, and I can smell what I was smelling back then. I can see vividly what I saw back then. I can feel the sensations. I feel the emotions that I felt, back then with some of these songs. And it's shocking, what kind of brings this up, right? So one of the things that we did as a kid, my father was in the Army. And so we moved around probably every 2 to 3 years. And what was common in Army families back in the 70s, if you're moving so often, well, why don't you buy a piano so that you have to move a piano every 2 to 3 years? And so that's exactly what my parents did. And I fell in love with the piano at a very, very early age. And the first tune that my mother taught me, my mother was instrumental across my musical life. You'll hear a little bit more about that as we go. The very first tune she taught me was this one. So I can get some piano noise here. Timed out. Technology. So go back in time with me here. How many of y'all have played that? Be honest, come on. Have you ever sung the words to that? The words are terrible. Don't sing the words. The words are terrible. But just that very simple melody, and keep in mind, I was 5 years old when this was all happening. I immediately became that kid on the block who, whenever there was a piano, I had to sit down. And it was relentless. You couldn't hold me back. And if any of my friends wanted to join in and they messed it up, I was like, no, you did it wrong. And I would kind of get in their face and, do this very terrible, terrible example of temperance but nevertheless, I was young. I'm still struggling with temperance in a lot of ways. But that kind of led to other kinds of songs. And in my Christian life, it melded very soon into learning what songs to God and songs to Jesus were all about. We, in the Army Chapel in Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania, just a few hours north of here, I remember going to our first Christmas service. Again, I think I was about 5 years old. And we sang, y'all know this one? And the theme, the refrain, yeah, I think the refrain on that is, they will know we are Christians by our love. And I remember latching onto that, and the very specific memory that brings back was walking home, because the post chapel was only a few blocks away from our house. Walking home from that Christmas service in the cold, in December, obviously, because it was always December in Pennsylvania for some reason. Walking home in the cold and having that song kind of go through my head. And I wondered what the words meant. Christians. I thought, well, Christians, that's an interesting word. I don't think I'd ever heard that before. And they'll know we are Christians by our love. And I didn't get love in the singing of the refrain in church, because we tend to chop the ends off our words when we sing a lot of the times. They will know we are Christians by our la. What would law be? Life? I don't know. By our life. I guess that kind of makes sense, but maybe it doesn't. And very quickly, I think I learned it was, oh no, by our love. Okay, great. And I like to think that that's one of those kind of foundational truths that I tend to go back to time and time again. When life is chaos and everything else kind of comes in and out and turns into whatever it's going to turn into, to remind myself that we are Christians, and we're known as Christians because of our love. It grounds me in a way that really very few other things do. And it's that very simple musical refrain from back when I was 5 years old that kind of does that to me. And so I want to kind of do another kind of series of little vignettes for you, and maybe we can get a little audience participation. I don't know. It's completely up to you. But kind of in following the theme of what Nikki did last week in calling out your favorite love songs, there are songs that I think you will hear, especially if you're in my generation. I'm Gen X, if that means anything. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, which means I was a child of TV and Saturday morning cartoons and largely being left alone during the day to do whatever it is that we did that nobody still really knows about. But music from that era was rich, right? And so, especially in the evening, right? So a lot of times when we were at home, the TV would be on. It was always on. My parents would be watching something, and you'd hear theme songs come and go. And again, to me, it kind of brings back very rich memories, like... So that, of course, is the theme from Hill Street Blues, right? Which was a very popular TV show in the early 80s. You would hear songs sometimes from another room, and again, it kind of evokes emotions, right? That song always meant it was time to go to bed. And that's kind of still what it means. I get very sleepy when I watch MASH reruns. I don't know why. It's one of those strange things. When I was 14 years old, my mother, I guess, recognized that I needed a bigger outlet for what I was doing musically. I was taking piano lessons, as a lot of kids did, learning all the tunes. And various levels of difficulty and things like this. And back then it was kind of all about the prestige of, well, I'm playing for Elise, or whatever, right? But that gets old, especially after my mom has heard this 730 times. She actually threatened to cut my fingers off if I played it again. And so she had seen an ad in the newspaper, which was advertising the local community theater needed a pianist to play for the upcoming production of the musical Godspell. And my mother, in her wisdom, thought, I bet David could do that. I was always David to my mother, right? Everybody else, I'm Dave or David. It doesn't really matter, but my mother was always David. So I bet David could do this. And so she encouraged me to go to the community theater. She actually had to drive me there because I wasn't obviously driving myself. And we had somehow gotten a hold of the score for the musical, and I learned a couple of the tunes. And so a little 14-year-old kid coming up in a community theater setting. Our town wasn't huge. It was maybe 70,000 people or so, but still it's big enough that you don't know anybody. And I didn't really know what I was getting into. I didn't know about musical theater really, just the very little bit that I was able to pick up. So, but I loved playing the piano, and I loved showing other people that I knew how to play the piano. So I come up to this audition, and just start playing one of the tunes. And then, of course, the rest kind of naturally came out. They actually invited me to be the pianist for that production. What was so rich about that, though, was it was really the first musical outlet for me that wasn't church. Even though the musical, if you're familiar with it, Stephen Schwartz, who, by the way, is the same composer who wrote Wicked and many other musicals that we all know and love, he wrote it within the context of, he's credited as additional lyrics by Stephen Schwartz. Most of the script, most of the musical text is either directly from the Bible or other scriptures. And so it was kind of yes and no. Yes, it was a religious outlet for my music. No, it was more of a community theater setting. But that's where, at 14 years old, mind you, that's where I realized that there are people out there, and a diversity of people that I had no idea even existed up to that point. I met my first openly gay couple playing for this musical theater at 14 years old, and this would have been, I don't know, what year would it have been? 1985-ish. That 1985, it was not a thing to be openly gay in 1985, yet these men were. Very, professionally so, discreetly so in public, of course, but undeniably so. And I had to kind of really think about that, reconcile that. I also met the husband of my 9th grade English teacher, who I also saw was having an affair with one of the other cast members. So I had to go to class as a 14-year-old kid, knowing what was going on, and it was talk about growing up fast, right? And in thinking back and reconciling, did my mother know that was what she was putting me into? And I've come since to conclude that she knew very well that that's what she was exposing me to. And in her wisdom, she knew that there was a wider world out there. So within the Godspell musical, it's largely based on the text from the Gospel of Matthew. And the vignettes on stage, if you've ever seen the musical, it still to this day is my absolute favorite stage production, because I think it tells the story of Jesus in a very powerful way, because it is all about how Jesus influences and rubs off on and encounters other people. And I loved playing for that musical. We sang, "Bless the Lord, oh my soul." Well, there's a version of that tune in Godspell, but it's Oh, bless the Lord, my soul. And it's a little bit more, kind of a bluesy, South, vibe, whatever. But I'm singing this tune, and this was my time with God for a very long time, was playing through these songs, playing through the musical, thinking through the text. I would just sit down and, and that's the All Good Gifts song, which is when we plow the fields and scatter the good seed on the land, for it is fed and watered by God's almighty hand. And it was my devotional time, was playing through this secular musical for many, many, many years. And now the photon is about to leave the surface of the sun here for you. There's a tune in Godspell that I later came to learn was almost word for word from one of the great psalms of Lament. It's the text of Psalm 137, we'll read it in just a second, is used to this day, especially in Orthodox and conservative Jewish services. It contains narrative that everybody says out loud in appropriate times, because it's one of those psalms that speaks to, I think, the very heart of lament and the very heart of longing. And it is one of those songs that when you hear it or when you say the verse, it takes you back to a former time. And not just from a reminiscing standpoint, but almost from an existence standpoint. And so let's see if we got some slides here. I actually tried to be a good example and follow the script here. So if you've never read this psalm, it's a very short one. And we're only going to go through the first 6 verses total, but verses 1 through 4 start out. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept, as we thought of Zion. There on the poplars we hung up our lyres, for our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of God on alien soil? And the tune in Gospel, of course, is the tune. It's titled "On the Willows," and one of the translational choices that are often made in Scripture is it poplars? Is it willows? We don't really know. The Jewish tradition is more poplars. The English Bible translations is more favoring the willows kind of translation. But nevertheless, the imagery is very plain. The people of God in a foreign land were asked to sing of their homeland, and they couldn't do it. They didn't want to do it. So much so that they hung their very instruments up so that they were inaccessible. And I got to tell you, I can relate to that so strongly, because some memories hurt, and some songs bring back not joyful memories. They bring back painful memories. And so that's the lament part of this message. I think one of the most important things we can do as people is to be honest with ourselves about our laments. What are those things that are just terrible? No other way to describe it but absolute tragedy in our lives and the lives of others and loved ones, people we know, people we've read about even. Lament happens, right? And for the people of Judah, I want to recycle a couple of slides that Matthew used in previous weeks. So keeping in mind, right, we've got Israel in the northern kingdom, we've got Judah in the south. Like all of recorded history, this land has been in continuous conquest, debate, negotiation. It's been a very, very ethereal, very temporal kind of existence for people in this region. Go to the next slide. During this time of Psalm 137, it is during the Babylonian conquest. So the Tigris and Euphrates River that run through present-day Iraq are those rivers that the people in the psalm are singing about or lamenting about. And then you can see looming off there to the east is this Persian Empire. And go to the next slide. It shows the overall timeline of what we're talking about here. So 922 years before the Common Era, Israel's divided into two kingdoms. This is stuff we kind of generally know pretty well. A couple hundred years later, the northern kingdom of Israel falls to the Assyrian Empire. What is the capital of Assyria? I don't know. 587, the southern kingdom of Judah falls to the Babylonian Empire. And the events from Psalm 137 likely happen in this kind of time frame, about between 580, 600 or so years before Christ, before the Common Era. But then, 50-ish years later, Babylon falls to Persia, and the exiles return. And so if you've read your Bible, you might know that the Jewish people were allowed to return to their homeland and reestablish the temple and reestablish the worship and things like this. So the Psalm of Lament in Psalm 137 became, a true memory in that sense. They were only around to sing about it because the Persians kind of came and changed everything, put everything on its ear. And then kind of, forwarding on from there, there's not slides for this, but this is your textbook history from grade school, right? The Greeks came and did their thing, and the Romans came and did their thing. But through this all, the Jewish people were able to be established. There were a few little skirmishes, a few little rebellions here and there. But by and large, they lived out their lives, for the next 460-ish years, 470 years or so, until the Common Era, when Rome finally decided, okay, we're going to, do something else. So how long is that really in terms of our present time? We just celebrated 250 years of the United States of America. How long is 250 years on this timeline? Not very long, really. It got me kind of thinking, right? What are some of the oldest established countries and civilizations on Earth? And I actually don't know the answer to this question. Maybe Matthew, you can help me out here. How old is merry old England? What's the conventional answer? 4 billion. Woo. It's the Rue Britannia. About 1,000 years old. How merry is merry old England? Depends on other things, he says. I do have to say, having been to Cedar Ridge now for going on three-ish years, I didn't really know what it was going to be like to give this message without a British accent. It really crossed my mind that I don't know, is that a thing here? I don't know. Nevertheless, it's been really fun, and I congratulate England on their third place World Cup win yesterday. That was a good game, I guess. I didn't watch it, unfortunately, because I had other things, but I heard it was a great game. I did not make up for it, no. Well, when Matthew first asked me to speak, it was actually with a little trepidation, because at that time, the U.S. and England were still in the running, and I was like, I don't know. The U.S. hasn't won it in, over 100 years, but, ever. But, it could happen, right? And then that would be really awkward if I was up here, talking about how we beat England somehow again. Oh, you had to bring that up. The president, sure, yes, the president. But getting back to this notion of timelines and eras, right? So England's about 1,000 years old. There's not even this much time between this psalm and the time of Christ to when England was established as a nation. There's more time than that, is what I'm trying to say. we sometimes lose our focus looking back so far. And that's not always a bad thing, really. I was thinking about how much church music has changed in that time. When the psalmists were talking about, not singing because of the painful memories, and being mocked by their tormentors and saying, "Sing us one of those merry songs," and they would rather throw their instruments away than indulge their captors. My mind went to what kind of music was that they were accustomed to singing and participating in the first temple period back then. And we have a lot of commands, a lot of decrees of how worship played out in that first temple period. I was actually very surprised to learn the instrumental makeup of a first temple orchestra was diverse and humongous. During temple worship, there were probably as many as 288 musicians doing their thing. And you had people playing the lyres and the harps and stringed instruments, and you had the brass, the sounding trumpets, right, we hear about in Scripture. You had percussion, but it wasn't drums necessarily. Percussion was more cymbals and things that made a clashing sound. And you can kind of imagine, the temple's really not that large. The tabernacle prior to that wasn't that large during David's time. That would have had to have been just an amazingly loud experience. But I imagine it wasn't contained just within the walls of the temple or the tabernacle. It clearly would escape out, and you'd know what was going on just by listening. And when we read the Psalms, and we occasionally get little snippets of, this is sung to the tune of, whatever else. This is a psalm of David sung to the tune of whatever, blah, 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 that by the lilies of something, something, right? That doesn't mean anything to us. The melodies and the tunes of these songs are long forgotten. And they were probably forgotten possibly even by this kind of timeline, so that when the second temple was finally established, when Nehemiah read the Holy Scriptures for the first time in the holy place after the captivity, there wasn't really anybody around even that probably even heard those songs. And so anything that would have been in their recollection would have been passed on to them by somebody else. And as we know, a lot gets lost in that translation. But getting back to what church music has become in the intervening time, there's really no right answer, I don't think, anymore. And that's one of the beautiful things about what we do as Christians. The individualness and the specialness of our worship is something that we can bring to a place like this. And it's something that we can have during the week when we're just by ourselves as well. And I find myself worshiping to all kinds of different styles, different tunes. There are tunes that don't have any words at all that sing to me in a worshipful way. So that was Beethoven. Beethoven didn't know that I was going to be worshiping to that when he wrote that, back in the 1700s or early 1800s. Yet there it is for me. It's kind of cool. I like it. I do kind of want to close, though, with this thought for you all. What do we do with these laments? And when I titled this talk, it was Songs of Lament and hope, question mark, little bit of a lilt, kind of at the end. And I don't really have an answer for you, because I think the answer is just as individualistic as whatever your lament might actually be. Thinking through timelines, thinking through how long history is, how long our lives are even. I'm 55 years old. It was shocking to me when we had the 250th celebration of the United States of America that I have been alive for over 20% of the life of the United States of America. I can't get over that. What that does tell me, though, is that time does march on. There's more that we can experience ahead of us a lot of times than what we've experienced behind us. To kind of, from a theological and philosophical standpoint, I love the existentialist Christians. Soren Kierkegaard in particular. He talks about this idea that we, the kind of one of the foundations of existential philosophy is that you are completely aware of the finitude, the finiteness of your existence. And from that we get, the term that I think a lot of us are familiar with, existential dread. That sense that there's something, something bad is looming, and you just know, and it could be death, it could be something else, right? But he actually turns that a little bit on its ear as one of the founders of existential philosophy, and brings a very Christian point of view to it, because he himself was a Christian. He was from Denmark, grew up in the state church, had a lot of criticism of the state church, but nevertheless, he spoke about philosophy in a very theological way, and he talks about this idea that we move forward with direction and purpose. So it's not just this time is marching forward and we're just coming ever closer to some inevitable doom, whatever, right? That's the pop sci, existentialist kind of mindset. What he talks about is moving forward with purpose and direction. And it's this idea that, so what if our lives, if we're only here for a short time? Let's figure out what there is to experience. Let's figure out what there is to do. Let's figure out where we can go from here. And I imagine, just as in the times later on, after the Persians came and kicked out the Babylonians and let the Jewish people return, they looked back on their time as, wow, that really didn't take all that long at all. Maybe, I don't know, not sure what they were expecting, but it did get relieved for them. Their worst case scenario as a people really didn't play out in a lot of ways. Sure, they were never the same, and a lot of things changed, but that led to centuries of peaceful, relatively peaceful existence, and setting the framework for Christ himself to come and teach and show us the ways of God. And I think that we can learn a lot from that, even in our hardest times, that there is always purpose somewhere. There is always direction somewhere. And our prayer often isn't so much, God, show us what to do. It's God, remind us that you care. That's really I think the truly revolutionary thing about Jesus is showing us that God cares. He cares what we do. He cares what we don't do. We're going to be coming to a time of communion, and if the music team can make their way back up to the stage. Thanks for reading my mind, Nikki. the song On the Willows that I kind of shared that kind of inspired this message happens in the play of Godspell during the Last Supper. And it's a very, very poignant scene in the musical. You see played out all the joy, all the joking, all the laughter that has been in the previous acts of this play are now culminating with Jesus, one by one, going to his disciples and saying goodbye. And they're not really sure what that means at this point in the play yet. But the love that he shows his disciples is something that I think translates very well on the theater stage. And I would sit there just enraptured, even as I'm having to play through this, because I'm the musician, right, playing this, but watching this carry out on stage. There were times, even as a 14-year-old kid, where I'm like crying, because it's just such a beautiful scene of Jesus going individually to his disciples. I love you. You know, I'm with you always. Where I'm going, you can't go. And they don't understand what's going on. But at the same time, as we know, now, over 2,000 years on the other side of all of that, there is hope, right? That's what Jesus promises. And so when we come to the communion table, that's the hope that we share in. It's the mysterious, indescribable presence of Christ with us here. And it's an open table here at Cedar Ridge. Everybody is welcome. And we've got gluten-free crackers and grape juice. And there's other stations around where you can mill around. There's a prayer station in the back. You can light a candle. Other stations along the ways you can participate in other kinds of ministries. And so as we come to this time, I just pray that the feeling of hope, even in the midst of perhaps a lament or perhaps of uncertain times, that could be what kind of fills this place and brings us closer to Christ and to each other.